Hi, this is Dr. John Grazel, and this is our synoptic video on what I call development bibliography. Where do you find information about development? Now, in fact, the good news is there is incredibly vast amounts of information about development. The bad news is that it's not easy to access and it's of an incredibly varying quality. The origin of the data is completely unstandardized. The accuracy really has to be questioned. Figures appear, for instance, on literacy around the world, but there's no standard definition of literacy around the world. There's censorship of data. There's inconsistency of categories. What one person calls agriculture may include livestock, what another doesn't include livestock. So the data we get out of development presents many problems to us. Now, once we get to that, we have to say, well, what are the sources of data? First of all, we have what we call popular notables. Various people who are well known out of their professions because of roles they play, and they tend to write books that speak of their experience and out of their experiences and their opinions. And those books tend to be popular, though in many cases short-lived. Now, after them, we have another group of what I call popular previous non-notables. And these are people who publish books about development that actually make them known because of claims that they make. And in that sense, where the first group of popular notables tend to be attached to their particular agendas, the second ones tend to be attached to that aspect of development that's going to make them notable. The third category are key organizations, the World Bank, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the various statistical bureaus of countries, magazines like The Economist. These are key organizations that collect data because they tend to be officially reliable organizations. There also is a belief that their data is reliable. That is questionable. Some of it is reliable. Some of it isn't. It's amazing how much World Bank data doesn't tell you where it gets its own data from. But the cachet World Bank makes it seem to be reliable. And countries, of course, play with their data to an incredible extent. Now, after the key organizations, we have a whole group of what I call the serious scholarly community. And they've existed since the very beginning of development, but they themselves break down into certain groups. There is a group, particularly at the beginning, that study case studies of development, case studies of the societies, the problems, what were the origins of the problems, what were their results. There was another group that has always focused on the theories of development, and they tend to be discipline-oriented rather than area-oriented like the first group, and explain why things happen. Then there's another group that have taken development in terms of grand theory. They look upon it in terms of how it's changing the world system or how it plays into the politics that are going on between neocolonialism at one time and during the Cold War. And then at the very end, there's a whole group that basically more and more are serious scholars in terms of trying to advocate new approaches and new experiences. All serious, all valuable, but all, as we see, taking limited perspectives, not grand holistic perspectives. Then we have the implementers themselves. And these tend to be, some are scholars, some are practitioners, and what they actually focus on are the real studies of the actual problems or real studies on terms of the actual groups and the statistics of the groups that are being affected, or what's even more hard, a whole group of what I call gray literature, where they write and exchange in their conferences and their dialogues between themselves on their experiences. And some of it is the most interesting, but the most difficult to get. Then you have a range of what I call unofficial documents. And these are everything from personal testimonies of people who have had experiences with development, to local, they could be foreigners, to local people, to students who are writing papers to diplomatic notes that have been written from people at embassies to actual sort of hidden accounts that sort of are just almost diaries of experience. And again, these can be among the most valuable in telling you the ground reality, but most difficult to actually find. Though, in fact, there are repositories for these. So, for instance, at one time, every Foreign Service officer had to debrief at the end of his career, and there are archives of debriefing from few past Foreign Service officers about their development experiences, but hard to find. Then you have a whole group of information that I call the agenda literature, and that's put out with people who have agendas. They can have political agendas, they can have public relations agendas because they advocate certain things. They can have agendas in terms of just sales. They're trying to sell you their services. That doesn't mean what they're saying can't be good, but it does mean what they're saying tends to be clearly selective in what they're presenting. And then, of course, there's the popular press. And the popular press in development is no different than the popular press everywhere else. It condenses things. It tries to grab the headlines. It goes with what looks attractive to people. It's very useful for getting you aware of what might be interesting. It's not that good in really telling you what the facts are. Now, a last group of documents are what I call working documents. And in fact, irony of ironies, these can be among the best and the hardest to get. And these are things that in the process of implementation, people have tried to use. They could be official evaluations, guidelines, and policies. And in fact, at one point, AID had a fabulous setup for doing really serious evaluations and best practices. They can be field manuals, field notes that people have put together for particular projects. They can be applied studies that people have done because, for instance, they financed or encouraged students to go with them and do studies. All of these are like working documents, extremely valuable, but extremely hard to find. They literally exist in the drawers and under the beds of people who have kept them both in America and in other countries where the work has been done. Now, how do you get that? You can start with the web, then you can go into the agencies. There are some sites on the web now that actually try to help you to get that information. There are repositories in a few select universities, University of Kentucky, Boston University African Studies Center, that in the past tried to collect this information, but it is not easy to get. Presuming that you can get them, how then do you put together and actually correlate and synthesize all these different forms of data? Well, the best I can tell you is what I do. I take expert or specialist opinions, and then I take what seem to be statistical and fairly objective empirical sources. And I try to get selective samples of all of them and put them together. And to the extent that they all seem to point in a certain direction, I can have a higher degree of confidence that they indicate things tend to be that way. While if they contradict each other, then I'm left with a problematic understanding about really what has gone on. But most of all, realize that this really is just to inform you and to inform processes of what we call consultation. But the best news is there's so much of it out there that if you use the process of triangulation, you are likely to get a sufficient amount that if you then use your critical senses to assess the quality, and if you weigh each of them together and see how much they are mutually supportive or not, you will get the insights and directions that will help you for informed reflection. But you will probably not get any definitive answers.